My brother took control of our father's care, then blocked all of us from seeing him until a nurse sent me a message that changed everything overnight. My phone buzzed at 2 in the morning and the preview said, "This is Marisol on your dad's unit. Please call me as soon as you see this." And I sat straight up so fast I pulled a muscle in my neck. Because I was not supposed to have a dad's unit anymore. Not in the way she meant it. Not in the way where a nurse knows your name. Not in the way where someone inside the building can even reach you. Because my brother made sure none of us could. I stared at the message until my eyes burned. Then I reread it. Then I looked at the number again like I could will it into being fake. And the worst part is it sounded real. It sounded like the kind of careful sentence a nurse writes when she knows she is stepping into something messy. My brother Owen has always been the person who moves first and then dares you to question him later. He is 41, I'm 35, and ever since we were kids, he has had this talent for taking the middle of the room and making everyone else orbit him. And my father used to call it leadership when we were younger, like it was a compliment, like it was a gift. Now it feels like a weapon that got sharper with age. Our dad, Elias, is 73, and until this summer he was the kind of older guy who acted younger than he was, not in a reckless way, in a stubborn way. The guy who insists on mowing his own lawn. The guy who refuses help carrying groceries. The guy who calls you kiddo even when you have a mortgage and a bad back. The guy who thinks hospitals are places you go to die, and he would rather die standing. Then he had a fall. It was stupid and ordinary. He tripped on a garden hose, hit his hip wrong, and what should have been a rough couple weeks turned into a cascade. Because the fall revealed he was weaker than any of us wanted to admit. The scan showed issues that had been hiding. The doctors started using phrases like deconditioning and cardiac strain and possible early cognitive decline. And suddenly my father was not just my father. He was a patient, a chart, a bed number. Owen lives 10 minutes from Dad's house in Reno. I live 6 hours away in Bakersfield. My sister Leanne lives in Colorado, and our youngest brother Grant is stationed in Washington. So the geography made Owen the default point person. And at first we were grateful, because we thought he would do the obvious. Keep us informed, coordinate, get Dad through the rehab, keep the family loop tight. Instead, Owen took the whole thing like a prize. The first few days after Dad was admitted, Owen called us constantly. Updates, details, medication changes, test results. He sounded helpful. He sounded concerned. He sounded like the responsible son, and every call ended with him saying he was handling it. He was on top of it. He was making sure Dad had the best. Then the calls got shorter. Then the calls started coming after decisions had already been made. Not before, like he was informing us of a weather report, not asking for input. Dad is going to rehab. Dad is switching doctors. Dad is signing new paperwork. Dad wants quiet. Dad does not want visitors right now. I pushed back once, gently, because I knew what Owen is like when he feels challenged. And Owen immediately turned it into me being emotional. He said I was making it harder. He said Dad needs calm, not chaos. He said I was turning a medical situation into drama. And that phrase, medical situation, sounded so polished coming out of him that it made my skin crawl. Leanne pushed harder, because Leanne is the one who says the uncomfortable thing. And Owen snapped that she was not there and therefore she did not understand. And he said something that started the real fracture. He said he is the one dealing with it, and he gets to decide what is best for Dad right now. Gets to decide. Like Dad is a project. The first time Owen blocked me was after I asked for the name of Dad's rehab facility. Not the address, not a room number, just the name, because I wanted to call and ask the nurse station when visiting hours were. I wanted to schedule a visit so Dad would not be startled. I wanted to do it respectfully. Owen replied hours later with a single line. Dad doesn't want visitors, he needs rest. And I replied that I wasn't asking about barging in. I was asking about planning a visit, and Owen did not respond. Then I noticed I could not see his social media posts anymore, which I did not care about. But it told me he blocked me there too, and after that my calls started going straight to voicemail. At first I tried to rationalize it. He's overwhelmed, he's stressed, he's busy. But then the pattern got too clean to ignore. He was not just missing calls, he was cutting off access. Leanne tried to call the rehab facility directly using the last name and Dad's date of birth, and the receptionist told her they could not confirm if Dad was there, which is normal privacy. But then Leanne asked if Owen Hart had been listed as the only approved contact. And the receptionist went quiet in a way that told Leanne she hit something real, and then she said she could not discuss it. Grant tried to call Dad's cell, and it went to voicemail. Then it started going to a message that said the number was not in service, which made no sense because Dad had that same number forever. And even if he forgot to pay a bill, Owen would pay it instantly if it benefited his image. Owen started telling family members that we were not helping, that we were harassing him, that Dad was tired of our drama, that Dad needed peace. And when you live far away and you're not physically present, those stories can spread faster than facts. My aunt, Owen's favorite audience, called me and asked why I was stressing Dad out, and I remember gripping the edge of my kitchen counter so hard my fingers went white, because it was like I was suddenly on trial for wanting to see my father. The most terrifying part was the silence from Dad. No calls, no texts, no angry message telling me to stop, no small sign that he was even aware we were trying. If Dad had told me directly that he wanted space, I would have respected it even if it hurt, because Dad is a grown man, but Owen was the only voice. Owen was the only gatekeeper. Owen was the only narrator. Then Owen started saying, Dad might not make it through the year. He dropped that line in a group text like it was a casual possibility, and he followed it with, I'm working on arrangements. And my heart slammed into my ribs because it felt like he was already stepping into the role of the grieving son, the one who handled everything, the one who made choices, the one everyone praises at the funeral. Leanne asked what the doctors said, and Owen replied that it was complicated and he did not want to explain it to people who would misinterpret and panic. And that wording made me feel sick, because he was not just blocking access, he was infantilizing us. We tried everything we could from a distance. Leanne called Adult Protective Services in Dad's county just to ask what the threshold is when family members are being blocked from contact with an elder, and APS told her they need specific concerns, they need evidence, they need the elder to be at risk, and Leanne said the risk is we don't know if he is safe, and the worker sounded sympathetic but constrained, like yes, this happens, and no, the system doesn't move fast unless there's blood on the floor. I called Dad's primary care office, the one he had for years, and the receptionist told me Dad was no longer a patient there, transferred care, and that made me dizzy, because Dad is loyal to his doctor like some people are loyal to sports teams. He would not switch casually. Grant asked a military legal office what options exist for checking on an elderly parent when one sibling blocks access, and the answer was basically state-dependent. You need counsel, you need documentation, and Grant sounded defeated because he can't just take leave whenever he wants, and Owen knows that. Meanwhile, Owen kept posting online. Not openly, because he blocked me, but my cousin sent screenshots. Owen was posting photos of Dad's dog, posting old throwbacks of Dad holding bobbies, posting vague lines about family sticking together during hard times, and in the comments, people were praising Owen for being such a devoted son. That praise is what Owen eats. I know that sounds cruel, but it's true. He needs the audience, and the more I saw strangers praising him, the more I felt certain that Dad was being used as a stage. The last normal conversation I had with Owen was 6 weeks after the fall, when I finally got him on the phone by calling from Jonah's number. Jonah is my partner. Owen didn't have Jonah saved, so he answered. The second he realized it was me, his voice shifted. That polite, tight patience tone, like he was already performing for someone in the room, and I told him I needed to speak to Dad. I did not ask, I stated it, because I was done being softened into silence. Owen told me Dad was resting. I told him to wake him. Owen told me Dad would be upset. I told him Dad can decide for himself. Owen told me I was being selfish. And I remember that word because it was such an insult coming from a man who was holding our father like property. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He told me Dad has good days and bad days, and on bad days he gets confused, and it's better if we don't agitate him. I asked Owen if Dad had been declared incompetent, and Owen said he didn't have to be incompetent to need protection, and that line was so smooth it sounded practiced, like he had rehearsed it with someone, like a social worker or a lawyer or just himself in the mirror. I asked Owen to give me the facility name. He refused. I asked him to let me talk to the charge nurse. He refused. I asked him if he changed Dad's phone number. He refused to answer, and then he ended the call. After that, nothing. No more responses, no more group texts, no more anything. Just the terrifying absence where your father exists somewhere in a building, and you cannot even confirm which building. I stopped sleeping normally. I would wake up at odd hours and check my phone because the only news I expected was bad news, and I started imagining every possible scenario. Dad alone, Dad sedated, Dad being pressured to sign something, Dad believing we abandoned him, and I hated my own brain for doing it, but I could not stop. Then Marisol's message landed. This is Marisol on your dad's unit. Please call me as soon as you see this. I stepped into the hallway so I wouldn't wake Jonah, and I called the number with my fingers shaking, and Marisol answered on the second ring like she was holding the phone waiting. She asked if I was Danny Hart, and the way she said it, careful but urgent, made my throat tighten, because she knew who I was, which meant she had my name in the chart somewhere, which meant Owen failed to erase me completely, or someone put me back. I asked her if my dad was alive, because that is where your brain goes, and she told me yes, he is alive, he is stable right now, and then she said something that changed my entire body temperature in 1 second. She said your dad asked me to contact you. He keeps asking why you stopped coming. He keeps saying he thinks Owen is mad at you, and he keeps saying he wants to hear your voice. I had to sit down on the floor in my hallway because my knees went weak, and I pressed my free hand over my mouth because the sound that wanted to come out was not a polite cry. It was a choke, like grief finally finding air. I told her Owen has blocked us. I told her we didn't know where he was, and Marisol went quiet. Then she said she figured something like that was happening, because Owen told staff that the family is toxic, and they should not accept calls from anyone but him. And Marisol said she is not supposed to step outside protocol, but she could not watch a patient beg for his daughter, and then be told it's for his own good. Then she said the part that made my blood go cold again. She said Owen brought in paperwork and insisted on changing your dad's contact list and access settings overnight. And he also insisted on changing your dad's code status. And when staff asked if your dad understood, Owen said your dad doesn't need to understand because it's what he would want. I asked her what code status dad is listed as now, and Marisol said, do not resuscitate, and the air left my lungs like someone punched it out. My father is not a man who quietly accepts dying. My father argues with doctors about whether he can go home. He argues about meds. He argues about exercise. He argues about everything. And I knew deep in my bones that he did not calmly decide to be do not resuscitate without telling any of us. Marisol said she cannot give me a full medical rundown over the phone, but she can tell me one more thing. She said your dad has been asking for you for days, and every time he asks, Owen tells him you don't want to be involved, and your dad's mood drops after that, like he believes it, like he thinks he pushed you away. I felt a kind of rage I can only describe as clean, like it wiped away fear, because now it wasn't just about access. It was about Owen rewriting reality inside my father's head while my father was vulnerable. I asked Marisol where Dad was, and she said he was transferred to a medical floor at a hospital in Reno after a complication at rehab, and she gave me the name. And when she said it, I wrote it down with shaking hands like I was back in school taking notes. Then she said, if you come soon, because Owen is trying to move him again. And she said that part in a lower voice, like she was aware of walls and ears. I asked her why she trusted me enough to call, and she said, because your dad talks about you like you are his anchor. And because when a patient keeps asking for a person who supposedly abandoned him, something doesn't add up. When the call ended, I went back into the bedroom and woke Jonah up. And the moment he saw my face, he sat straight up. And I told him we're driving to Reno today. And Jonah did not ask questions. He just nodded like his body already understood the plan. Leanne answered on the first ring when I called. And when I told her what Marisol said, Leanne went silent. Then she made this sound like she was holding back a sob. Then she said, we go now. And when I told Grant, he went quiet and said he would call his chain of command. And he sounded furious in that controlled way people sound when they are trying not to break something. We drove through the dark, Jonah and I watched the sky turn from black to gray to pink. And the whole time my brain played one loop. Dad thinks I abandoned him. Dad thinks I abandoned him. And every mile felt like a confession of how long it took me to get here. When we got to the hospital, the front desk told me they could not give information, and I told them I was his daughter, and they asked for a code word, and I felt my stomach drop because of course Owen said a code. I asked them to contact the charge nurse, because I knew Marisol's name now and names matter in buildings like this. And a few minutes later a nurse came out and asked me to step aside, and she asked who I was, and I told her my full name, and I told her that my father asked a nurse to contact me, and I told her I was here to see him. The nurse looked tired, then she looked at her screen, then she looked back at me and said your name is in his chart as emergency contact number 2, and I almost cried at the word 2, because it meant Owen did not fully erase me, he just buried me. Then she said Owen is listed as the primary decision maker, and he has requested no visitors, and my heart hammered, because I could feel the gate closing again. I asked her if my father is alert, and she said he has lucid moments, and I said then he can consent to seeing his daughter, and I said it clearly because I needed them to hear the logic. The nurse hesitated, then said she would check with the unit manager, and those minutes waiting felt like standing outside your own life. Then Marisol appeared, and I recognized her from nothing except her voice and the fact she looked like someone who had been holding a line alone. She came up to me and quietly said he's awake right now. He's asking again. And she asked me if I was safe, like she was checking whether this was a volatile family, and I told her I'm safe. I'm just angry. And she nodded like she understood that specific kind of anger. They let me back with an escort, and my heart slammed so hard I felt dizzy, and then I saw my dad. He looked smaller. It is such a simple sentence, and it holds so much grief. My dad looked smaller, his hands looked thinner, his face looked drawn, and he had that pale hospital light on him that makes everyone look like they're halfway out of their body. He turned his head when he heard my voice, and his eyes widened, and he stared like he thought he was hallucinating. Then he tried to sit up too fast and winced, and he whispered my name in this cracked voice, and I walked to his bedside and put my hand on his forearm, and I told him I'm here, and his face folded, not dramatic, just relief leaking out of him like air. He asked why I stopped coming, and I felt my throat tighten so hard I could barely speak, and I told him I didn't stop. I couldn't get to you. Owen blocked us, and Dad blinked like he didn't understand. Then he whispered, Owen told me you were busy and you didn't want the stress, and hearing that made my whole body go hot. Dad asked if Leanne was okay, asked if Grant was okay, asked if he did something wrong, and those questions are what broke me, because it meant Owen didn't just isolate him. Owen rewrote him into a burden, like Dad's existence was an inconvenience we were avoiding. Then Dad said the thing that made everything shift from heartbreaking to urgent. Dad said Owen made me sign papers when I was sleepy, and I asked what papers, and Dad said he said it was so I could rest, and he said he kept telling me you were all mad at me, so I signed because I didn't want trouble. Marisol wasn't in the room anymore, it was just us, and Jonah standing by the door like a quiet wall, and I felt this cold, focused panic, because signing papers when you're sleepy is not consent, it's pressure. Dad asked if he was dying, and I told him the truth as gently as I could. I told him he's sick and he needs care, but he's here, he's breathing, he's talking, and we are here. And Dad stared at me for a long time. Then he whispered he changed my status, didn't he? I asked what he meant, and Dad said Owen told the nurse I wanted to be left alone if my heart stopped. And Dad's eyes were wet but angry, and he whispered I never said that. I said I don't want to be a vegetable, but I never said let me go. And I realized Owen was taking Dad's normal fear and turning it into a do not resuscitate label without Dad actually choosing it. I asked Dad if he wanted us involved in his care decisions, and he grabbed my hand tighter than I expected and whispered yes, get them back in. I don't want to be alone with him making choices. That sentence, alone with him making choices, was the most frightening thing my father has ever said to me, because my father is proud, and if he is admitting fear, it means it is real. I stepped into the hallway and asked to speak to the unit manager and social worker immediately, and Jonah stayed with Dad, and my voice was calm but my body was vibrating, and I told them my father is requesting contact with his children, and my father is stating he did not consent to a do not resuscitate change, and my father is stating he was pressured to sign documents while sedated, and I need this documented right now. The unit manager's face changed when I said do not resuscitate, because that is not a casual topic, and she said they would assess Dad's capacity, and they would speak to him privately, and they would involve the hospital's social worker, and she asked me if there was any existing advance directive, and I told her we have never been given one. Only Owen has been controlling information, and the manager's expression went tighter, like she'd seen this movie before. Owen showed up 2 hours later. He walked into Dad's room with that calm smile like he was arriving at a meeting he expected to lead, and the moment he saw me he froze for half a second, then he recovered. Then he looked at Jonah like Jonah was furniture. Then he looked back at me and asked what I was doing here. Dad spoke before I did, and Dad's voice was weak but firm. He told Owen he wanted all his kids involved, and Owen's jaw tightened like he did not expect Dad to contradict him out loud. Owen tried to smooth it. He told Dad he didn't need stress. He told Dad he was protecting him. He told Dad he was keeping drama away, and Dad stared at him and said I asked for my daughter, and you told me she didn't care. Owen's face flushed. Then he tried to pivot. He claimed Dad misremembered, and that claim was the moment I knew Owen's whole strategy depended on Dad being treated like unreliable. The social worker arrived and asked Owen to step out, and Owen resisted at first. Then he did it with that offended posture, and in the hallway he told me I was being disgusting for ambushing him, and I told him I was here because Dad asked for me, and Owen's eyes narrowed like he hated that Dad had a voice again. Over the next day, the hospital did a capacity assessment with Dad, and they documented that he understood who we were, where he was, what decisions meant, and he expressed a consistent preference to have all his children informed, and he expressed confusion and distress about being isolated. And hearing that in a calm, professional tone was both relieving and horrifying, because it meant the system finally saw what we had been screaming into silence. The do not resuscitate status was reviewed, and it was changed back to full code pending a proper conversation with Dad and the medical team, and Owen tried to argue, but the unit manager shut him down, and Owen's face looked stunned, like he didn't realize that in a hospital, charm only works until documentation shows up. Leanne flew in the next morning, and when Dad saw her he cried, not loud, just tears sliding down his cheeks, and Leanne held his hand and said she was sorry, and Dad whispered I thought you didn't want me anymore, and Leanne's face broke, and I wanted to rip Owen's script out of the air and shred it. Grant got emergency leave a few days later, and arrived looking like a man who had been holding rage inside his ribs for weeks, and Dad's whole posture changed when all of us were in the room, like his body finally believed he wasn't alone. Owen started acting like he was the victim. He told anyone who would listen that we were ganging up on him, that he was just trying to help, that we swooped in to criticize after he did all the work. And he kept using the phrase all the work, like Dad was labor. And maybe that's how Owen sees everything, as effort that deserves rewards. The social worker asked about power of attorney documents, and Owen produced a folder like he had been waiting to show it off. And he kept emphasizing that Dad signed it willingly, and the social worker asked when it was signed. And Owen gave a date that matched a day Dad barely remembered because he had been heavily medicated after a complication. Dad looked at the paper, then looked at Owen, and whispered, "You told me it was for my insurance." And the social worker's face tightened, because misrepresenting documents to a patient is not just family drama, it's coercion. By the end of that week, the hospital restricted Owen's ability to be the sole gatekeeper. They documented Dad's request for family involvement, and the social worker helped Dad set a new contact list, including all of us. And Dad insisted Jonah be listed too, because Jonah has been the steady adult in this storm, and Owen's face looked like someone had taken away his keys. When Dad was stable enough to transfer to a skilled nursing facility again, we chose one together, not Owen alone, and Owen tried to fight it, but he couldn't fight Dad saying out loud, "I don't want my son alone in charge." That sentence should have ended everything, but Owen does not stop when he loses a round. He just switches games. 2 weeks after Dad transferred, Owen filed a petition in county court claiming Dad lacked capacity and that Owen needed emergency authority to manage Dad's affairs because the other siblings were interfering. And when the paperwork arrived at my house in Bakersfield after I returned home, I felt that same metallic taste from the night the nurse messaged me, because Owen was escalating into the legal system now. I gathered every document, every note, every hospital record we were allowed to have, and the messages from Marisol, and I booked another flight to Reno, because I wasn't letting Owen turn my father into a silent object again. Update, 7 weeks later. The court hearing did not feel like a dramatic TV moment. It felt like a cold room where adults argue about someone's life, while that someone sits there wearing a sweater and trying to look dignified. Dad insisted on attending, even though it exhausted him, because he said he wanted the judge to see his face, not just his paperwork, and that line made my throat tighten because my father understood the problem perfectly. The problem is when you become a file, the loudest person wins. Owen arrived with an attorney, and he walked in like he was the responsible son again. Crisp shirt, calm voice, and he greeted people like he was hosting. And I could see the performance in his shoulders. I could see how he expected the room to treat him as the hero. Leanne and Grant sat with me, Jonah sat behind us, and Dad sat with his hands folded in his lap, looking smaller than the man who used to mow his own lawn, but his eyes were sharp. Owen's attorney argued that Owen had been managing Dad's care, that the other siblings were distant and disruptive, that Dad was confused and vulnerable, and that Owen needed the authority to protect him from being manipulated. That word manipulated hung in the air like smoke, because it was Owen's favorite accusation. If someone disagrees, they must be manipulating, because Owen can't accept that Dad might simply want a different choice. Our attorney, because yes, we hired counsel together, presented the hospital documentation showing Dad requested contact with all children, the note about distress when isolated, and the documentation that the do not resuscitate status was changed without a clear, informed conversation on record. And I watched Owen's jaw tighten as his image started to crack under paper. Then the judge asked questions, and I expected the questions to be complicated, but the first one was almost painfully simple. The judge asked Owen why, if he was acting solely out of care, he blocked all siblings and prevented Dad from direct contact. Owen started talking about stress, about peace, about family conflict, about protecting Dad, and the judge interrupted and asked again, "Why did you block phone access?" Owen said Dad didn't need a phone, and Dad made a sound like a short laugh, bitter and small, and the judge looked directly at Dad and asked if Dad wanted phone contact with his children. Dad said yes, immediately, no hesitation, and Owen's attorney tried to redirect. But the judge held up a hand and asked Dad if Owen told Dad that the children didn't care. Dad said yes, and Dad's voice shook, and Dad said he believed it for a while, and then Dad looked at Owen and said I was lonely, and you let me be lonely so you could make choices without hearing anyone else. Owen's face went red, and he tried to speak, and Dad spoke over him, not loud, just firm. Dad said I don't want Owen alone in charge. I want my children involved. I want to live. I want my choices explained to me, and I want my phone. The judge asked Owen a follow-up that felt like the knife turning. The judge asked Owen to explain why a do not resuscitate order was placed without the rest of the family knowing, and without a documented conversation that Dad understood. Owen said Dad mentioned not wanting to be kept alive artificially, and the judge asked if Owen understood the difference between not wanting prolonged suffering and refusing resuscitation in an emergency context. And Owen started sputtering. Because Owen is not a medical professional, he was using phrases like tools without knowing how they actually work. The judge asked if Owen had any documentation of Dad expressing "do not resuscitate" in writing, and Owen did not. Owen's attorney tried to argue that Owen acted in good faith, but the judge kept returning to the pattern, isolation, unilateral decisions, misrepresenting family involvement, and inconsistency between Owen's statements and the hospital record. The court did not strip Owen from everything instantly, because courts move carefully, but it did appoint a neutral professional guardian to oversee major decisions temporarily, and it ordered that all children have reasonable access, and it required transparency on medical changes and facility transfers. And when that order was read aloud, I saw Owen's face shift from righteous to furious in a single breath. After the hearing, Owen tried to corner me in the hallway. He stood too close, voice low, telling me I ruined his life, telling me I turned Dad against him, telling me I always hated him. And it was so childish in that moment it almost made me sad, because this is a grown man trying to punish his sister for not playing a role. I told him to step back, not dramatic, just firm, and Jonah moved slightly between us, and Owen looked at Jonah with pure contempt, because Owen hates witnesses. He hates anyone who sees the pattern clearly. The weeks after the hearing were both calmer and harder. Calmer because Owen could not slam doors anymore without consequences. Harder because Dad started processing what happened. And watching your father realize he was manipulated is like watching a house settle after an earthquake. Everything creaks, everything shifts, and you can't pretend you didn't feel it. Dad asked me one night, quietly, if I believed Owen loved him. I told Dad I believed Owen loves the idea of being the good son more than he loves the messy work of honoring Dad as a person. And Dad stared at the wall for a long time and whispered that's what it felt like he was a trophy Owen carried around. Marisol visited Dad once after her shift, just briefly, because she wanted to see him as a person, not a chart, and Dad thanked her. And Marisol teared up and said she did what she would want someone to do for her own father, and I wanted to hug her, because she changed everything with one message, and she probably went home that night wondering if she just made her own job harder. The neutral guardian arranged a family care meeting with the facility and the doctor, and for the first time in months, everyone sat at the same table hearing the same information, and Owen had to sit there hearing it too, without being able to filter it. Owen tried to dominate the conversation at first, but the guardian cut him off politely each time and asked for Dad's input. And watching Owen be forced to listen to Dad felt like watching someone lose oxygen, because Owen is not used to Dad being treated like the authority in his own life. Dad got stronger over time, not fully, but enough. He could walk farther, he could follow conversations longer, he could joke again. And that alone changed the whole temperature of the room, because when Dad started sounding like himself, Owen's favorite argument started collapsing, the argument that Dad was too confused to be trusted with his own life. Owen hated that shift, and he reacted the only way he knows how, by trying to regain control through logistics, not love. 2 days after the care meeting, the facility called the neutral guardian because Owen tried to remove Dad for an appointment that was not on the calendar, and he showed up with a wheelchair van he claimed he scheduled. And he insisted the staff release Dad to him immediately. And when they refused without the proper authorization, Owen escalated, raising his voice, threatening to report them, insisting they were violating Dad's rights. The staff held the line because the guardian had already placed flags on Dad's file. And that was the first time I realized how much power comes from a boring note in a system, because a flag is not emotional. It is not a plea. It is a rule, and rules are harder for Owen to bulldoze. When the guardian confronted Owen later, Owen tried the wounded routine, the routine where he is just a son trying to help, and everyone is attacking him. And the guardian responded calmly that help is not the same as control, and Owen's face tightened like he was being starved. Dad heard about the incident and went very quiet. Then he asked me to bring him his wallet. That request sounded small, but it was huge, because Dad's wallet had been missing since the first rehab transfer, and Owen told us it was lost. And we had all accepted that because in a hospital you lose things, it happens, but Dad looked me straight in the eye and told me he did not think it was lost. Dad said Owen took it. He didn't say it dramatically. He said it like a tired fact. The guardian filed a request with the facility to inventory Dad's personal property and confirm what was on file, and the list was thin, too thin, like Dad had been reduced to pajamas and a toothbrush. And if you have ever seen an older person's life condensed like that, it is shocking in a way you feel in your teeth. Leanne and I went to Dad's old house with the guardian's permission to retrieve personal items, and the moment we walked in, we knew Owen had been there more than he admitted. The living room looked staged, Like someone had cleared anything that felt like Dad. The old recliner moved, the family photos partly removed, the junk drawer emptied, the kind of cleaning that is not cleaning, it is erasing. Leanne opened Dad's desk drawer and found it empty except for one envelope with a sticky note on it that said handled. No signature, no date, just handled like Owen was marking tasks on a checklist. In Dad's bedroom closet, his safe was gone. Not open, not broken, gone. And that was the moment my body went cold, because you can argue about medical decisions and family dynamics all day, but a missing safe is not a misunderstanding, it is removal. We told the Guardian immediately, and the Guardian asked if we had documentation that a safe existed, and I did, because Dad once sent me a photo of the safe serial number years ago when he bought it. He did it in a proud Dad way, like he was showing me he was being responsible, and I had the message archived in my phone like a fossil. The Guardian's expression changed when I showed her, and she asked for a copy. When Dad heard the safe was gone, he closed his eyes for a long time. Then he whispered that the safe had his will and his old military papers and his marriage certificate and his mother's ring and the deed copies. He said he kept sentimental things in there because he did not trust the world with them, and now the world had walked off with the whole box. Dad asked me if Owen stole from him. That question felt like swallowing glass, because it is one thing to know a sibling is controlling. It is another thing to look your father in the face while he asks if his son robbed him. I told Dad the truth. I told him it looks like Owen removed it, and we need Owen to explain where it went, and Dad stared at the ceiling like he was counting cracks. That evening, Owen tried to call Dad. It was the first time Owen tried to directly reach Dad since the court hearing, and the facility handed Dad the phone because they follow patient wishes, and Dad held it for a second, then handed it back and said no. Not no with anger, no with resignation. Dad asked the nurse to document that he declined the call, and I watched him do it like someone learning a new language, the language of boundaries. The next day, Owen showed up again, this time with a small bag and a bright smile, and he walked into Dad's room like none of this happened, like Dad would be so grateful to see him that everything would reset. Dad looked at him and asked one question, "Where is my safe?" Owen's smile flickered, just a flicker but enough. Owen tried to laugh and said, "What safe?" And Dad repeated it, "Where is my safe?" Owen tried to say it was removed for security. Then he tried to say the facility advised it. Then he tried to say Dad must be confused. And Dad's eyes went sharp, and he told Owen he knew exactly what he was talking about. Owen's face hardened, and he snapped that he did what he had to do because the rest of us would have stripped Dad's house and left him with nothing. And that accusation was so upside down, it almost made me dizzy. Dad told him to stop projecting, and hearing my father use that word made me almost laugh through tears because Dad is not a therapy language guy. Dad is a plain language guy, which meant he had been thinking about this for weeks. Owen started talking fast, insisting he was the only one who cared enough to handle things, insisting he took the safe to protect it from strangers, insisting he would return it when everyone stopped attacking him, and Dad's voice went quiet and dangerous. Dad told him that is not protection, that is holding my life hostage. The nurse in the room, not Marisol but another nurse named Devin, stepped closer, and Owen noticed and shifted back into his calm public voice, the voice he uses when there are witnesses, and he told Dad he loved him, and Dad said love does not hide my papers. Owen left after that, and he slammed the door hard enough the wall shook. 2 hours later, the Guardian called me and said Owen requested an emergency meeting because he claimed Dad was being manipulated by his daughters. Hearing that line made me feel something close to dark amusement, because it is Owen's universal move. If he cannot control the conversation, he claims someone else is controlling it, and he says it with so much certainty that people who do not know him sometimes believe it. The emergency meeting happened the next morning by phone. The Guardian, the facility social worker, Owen, me, Leanne, Grant, and Dad. And the Guardian asked Dad directly what he wanted. Dad said he wanted Owen removed as the primary point of contact. He wanted Owen to stop handling his finances. He wanted his phone back. He wanted access to his mail. He wanted his safe returned. And he wanted no one to make medical decisions without explaining them to him first. Owen tried to talk over him, and the Guardian stopped him and said she asked Dad, not Owen. Dad repeated his wishes, slower, like he was making sure the words landed. The social worker asked Owen if he had Dad's safe, and Owen dodged, saying it was safe, saying it was protected, and the social worker asked where it physically was. Owen said it was at his house. I felt my skin go cold, because that was the first honest sentence he gave, and it came only because he was cornered by the simplest question, where is it? The Guardian asked Owen to bring the safe to the facility by the end of the week to be opened in Dad's presence, and Owen objected, and the Guardian reminded him that refusing would be noted as obstructing access to personal property. Owen tried to say Dad gave it to him willingly, and Dad said no, you took it while I was in the hospital. Owen's voice got tight, and he asked Dad why he was doing this to him, and Dad said, because I finally see what you are doing. That sentence made the room go very quiet, even through a phone speaker. Owen brought the safe back 2 days later, but he did it like a performance. He arrived with it in the back of a truck. He made sure staff saw him carry it. He spoke loudly about how he kept it safe, how he protected everything, how he would do anything for his father, and I could see the strategy. He was trying to create a scene where he looked noble. But the safe was scuffed, the dial looked scratched, and the moment Dad saw it, his face closed like a door. Dad asked Owen to open it. Owen hesitated. Dad asked again. Owen said he did not know the combination, which was absurd because Dad had used the same combination for years, and Dad told him the combination, and Owen's hands shook slightly as he turned the dial, and watching that was like watching someone forced to unlock a room they were hopping to keep hidden. The safe opened, and the first thing Dad did was count what mattered. The will was there, the military papers were there, the deed copies were there, the marriage certificate was there, the ring box was there, but the envelope with cash Dad kept for emergencies was gone. Not a fortune, not a movie stash, but enough that Dad's eyebrows lifted in a way that hurt me, because it meant Dad had been right to distrust what was happening. Dad looked at Owen, then looked at the nurse present, then looked back at Owen, and he asked where it went. Owen tried to say Dad must have spent it, and Dad said from a hospital bed. Owen tried to say maybe a nurse stole it, and the nurse's face went flat, and I could see the nurse mentally stepping back into professional mode, because that kind of accusation is not just rude. It is dangerous, and Owen threw it out like smoke because he wanted any other villain to exist besides himself. Dad asked Owen again where it went, and Owen got angry and said it went to bills, and Dad asked which bills, and Owen could not answer because he did not have one ready. The Guardian asked Owen to provide a basic accounting of any funds he managed, receipts, dates, explanations, and Owen snapped that he is not a criminal. And the Guardian responded calmly that transparency is not a punishment. It is a requirement when you assume control. Owen stormed out of the facility after that. 2 days later, he posted online about being attacked by ungrateful siblings and being accused of things he did not do. And people comforted him in the comments. And I realized he would rather keep the sympathy than keep the relationship. A week after the safe incident, Dad asked to change his legal documents. Not impulsively, not out of revenge, but to protect himself, because he had learned the same lesson we learned. Owen does not respect boundaries he cannot enforce. Dad met with an attorney recommended by the neutral Guardian in a room at the facility with witnesses, and Dad revoked Owen's power of attorney. Then he set up a limited shared arrangement that required at least 2 of his children to be notified for major changes, and he appointed the neutral Guardian to oversee medical decisions if there was any conflict, because Dad said he does not want his kids tearing each other apart in his name. That was when Owen truly lost it. He arrived at the facility yelling, and the staff called security, and he tried to force his way down the hall. And when security stopped him, he shouted that we were kidnapping his father, and hearing him use that word made my stomach twist, because it was the same tactic he used from the beginning, claim the thing he is doing is being done to him. Dad did not see that scene. We made sure of it, but Dad heard about it anyway, because buildings have ears, and Dad sat in his bed with his hands folded and said Owen is going to burn himself down before he admits he is wrong. That week, the neutral Guardian requested a court review, not to create drama, but because Owen's behavior was escalating, and the risk of him trying to move Dad again was real. The review hearing was brief, and Owen's attorney argued that the Guardian was overstepping, and the judge asked Owen why he kept attempting to isolate Dad from his other children, and Owen tried to frame it as protection, and the judge asked why protection required lying to Dad about his children not caring. Owen started to say he never lied, and the judge asked Dad directly if Owen told him that, and Dad said yes. And Dad added that Owen told him his daughters were too busy to be bothered, and Dad's voice cracked when he said it. Because humiliation hits older people differently, they carry it like a weight. The judge imposed strict boundaries. Owen could visit only during set windows, with staff notified. No removing Dad from the facility without documented consent and Guardian sign-off. No changes to code status without documented physician conversation and Dad's signature while fully alert, and no interference with phone or mail access. Owen's face during that ruling looked like someone watching their own script burn. After that, Owen went quiet. Not remorseful quiet, tactical quiet. Leanne and I braced for another move, because Owen is not the kind of person who stops. He pauses. The pause lasted until the day Marisol messaged me again. This time it wasn't urgent. It was a simple note that said, "Your dad asked me to tell you he had a good day. He walked farther. He ate real food. He laughed at the bad movie on the room television, and he wants you to stop blaming yourself for not being there sooner." I cried in my car reading that, because it was the first message that felt like normal life again, like Dad wasn't a battlefield, like he was just a man recovering and asking for his family. Final update, 10 months later. Dad lives in an assisted living community now, not because we gave up on him, because it's the safest middle ground between independence and care. He has his own small apartment, his own chair by the window, his own routine, and he calls it his clubhouse because he refuses to call it anything that sounds like decline. He has his phone, he has his mail, he has his wallet, and he keeps his safe in a secure storage option the facility provides, and he jokes that he finally learned to stop trusting his own children with his secrets. Then he laughs, then he squeezes my hand like he's apologizing for the joke without saying sorry. Owen is still in Dad's life, but Owen is not in control. That difference is the whole point. Owen visits sometimes, and those visits are tense but contained, because staff knows the boundaries, the guardian knows the boundaries, Dad knows the boundaries, and the moment Owen tries to push, he gets stopped, not by screaming, by process. Owen tried one last time to regain the old narrative at a family gathering. He showed up at a cousin's barbecue and started telling people he saved Dad. He started implying we abandoned him, and Dad heard about it later and just looked tired. Then Dad made one call. He called Owen and told him if Owen keeps lying about his siblings, Owen will not be welcome in his clubhouse. Owen laughed like it was a bluff, and Dad did not laugh back. Owen backed down after that, not because he suddenly developed empathy, because for the first time he realized Dad's approval is not guaranteed. The money issue ended in the most boring way, which is the only way these things really end. The guardian requested account statements. Owen delayed. The court ordered compliance. Owen produced partial records. The judge required an accounting. And in the end, Owen had to repay what he could not explain, not in a dramatic courtroom confession, in a quiet settlement that let him avoid admitting guilt out loud. Dad did not celebrate that outcome. Dad looked sick when he signed the final paperwork, because it is one thing to lose money. It is another thing to lose faith in your own child. And Dad told me he would have given Owen money if Owen asked. The stealing wasn't the deepest wound, the lying was. Marisol transferred units a few months ago, but she still sends Dad a holiday card, and Dad keeps it on his counter like a trophy, because he knows one nurse chose to see him as a person when the system was treating him like a file. Grant re-enlisted. Leanne visits when she can. I drive when I can. And Jonah keeps doing the quiet, supportive things he does, like bringing Dad his favorite snacks and fixing the little things in Dad's apartment that make him feel capable. The biggest change is that Dad stopped asking why we didn't come, because he finally knows we tried. He finally knows the silence wasn't us abandoning him. It was Owen building walls. And once Dad understood that, the shame lifted off his shoulders. And watching an older man drop shame is like watching someone finally put down a heavy bag they've been carrying without realizing it. Owen still posts online sometimes, vague lines about family and sacrifice and being misunderstood, and I don't check them. I don't need to, because Dad is not a storyline anymore. He's a real man with a phone in his hand, calling his daughter to complain about the food in his clubhouse. And that is the most ordinary, most precious sound I didn't realize I could lose until it almost vanished.